I stared at my phone screen, reading the message for the fifth time in complete disbelief. After 3 years of absolute silence, my mother had sent me a text that made my blood run cold. Your brother Danny needs money for rehab. We're driving to Seattle. Be ready. The audacity hit me like a freight train. These were the same people who had completely severed contact when I moved cross-country to chase my software engineering dreams. Now that my startup had just been acquired for $12 million, they suddenly remembered I existed. What they didn't realize was that I had spent the last year quietly helping Danny through a private rehabilitation program they never bothered to learn about. The memories crashed over me like a tsunami as I set my phone down on my mahogany desk. 3 years ago, I was a completely different person, living a completely different life in the suffocating small town of Cedar Falls, Indiana. Population 8,000, where everyone knew everyone else's business and dreams were considered dangerous luxuries. I had been working at Tech World Electronics, a cramped store in the dying mall where I sold overpriced cables and outdated computers to farmers and retirees. The pay was $9 an hour, barely enough to cover rent on my studio apartment above the Chinese restaurant. But during my lunch breaks and late into the night, I taught myself programming through free online courses, devouring every tutorial I could find about JavaScript, Python, and mobile app development. My parents, Frank and Susan, lived 15 minutes away in the house, where I grew up, a modest ranch with peeling paint and a sagging front porch. Every Sunday dinner was the same ritual of disappointment and comparison. They would spend hours gushing about my younger brother Danny, the golden child, who could do no wrong in their eyes. Danny had been the star quarterback at Cedar Falls High School, leading the team to their first state championship in 20 years. College scouts had fought over him, and he eventually accepted a full ride to Notre Dame. Our living room was a shrine to his achievements, trophy cases, newspaper clippings, and framed photos of him in his uniform. My computer science books and coding certificates were shoved into a corner, gathering dust. When I finally landed my break, a remote junior developer position with a growing tech company in Seattle, I was ecstatic. The salary was $45,000 a year, more money than I had ever dreamed of making. But more importantly, it was my ticket out of a town that had never understood my ambitions. I had rushed to my parents' house that evening, bursting with excitement about the opportunity. I found them in the kitchen, Mom preparing her famous meatloaf, while Dad read the local paper. Their reaction was not what I had expected. "You want to move where?" Dad had asked, looking up from his newspaper with a frown that deepened the lines around his weathered eyes. "Seattle, Washington." "It's an amazing opportunity, Dad. This company is developing cutting-edge software for healthcare systems. I could really make something of myself there." Mom had stopped stirring the mashed potatoes and turned to face me, her expression cold and disapproving. "Clint, that's 2,000 miles away from your family. Danny would never abandon us like this." The word abandon hit me like a slap across the face. Here I was, trying to build a career and create a better life for myself, and they saw it as betrayal. Dad had folded his newspaper and stood up, his 6-foot frame towering over me. "Your mother is right, son. Family comes first. Danny understands loyalty. He's coming home after graduation to work with me in the construction business. That's what real men do. They don't chase fairy tales on the other side of the country." I tried to explain that this wasn't a fairy tale, that software development was a legitimate and growing field with incredible opportunities, but their minds were made up. To them, leaving Cedar Falls meant I thought I was better than everyone else, that I was ungrateful for everything they had provided. The conversation had escalated into a full-blown argument that night. Mom accused me of being selfish and immature. Dad questioned whether I was man enough to handle the real world outside of our small town. They refused to help with moving expenses or even offer emotional support for my decision. Over the next 2 weeks, as I prepared for the biggest move of my life, The silence from my parents was deafening. They didn't return my phone calls or respond to my text messages. When I stopped by the house to say goodbye, they weren't home, even though Dad's pickup truck was in the driveway. I loaded everything I owned into my beaten Honda Civic and began the 1,500-mile journey to Seattle completely alone. The drive took me 3 days with overnight stops in cheap motels along Interstate 80 and Interstate 84. I called my parents from every stop, hoping they would at least wish me luck or tell me they loved me. Every call went straight to voicemail. When I arrived in Seattle and found my tiny studio apartment in Capitol Hill, I was overwhelmed by the city's energy and diversity. The neighborhood buzzed with coffee shops, bookstores, and young professionals pursuing their dreams. But the loneliness was crushing. I had left everything familiar behind, and my family had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with my new life. For months, I continued reaching out. I sent letters describing my new job and the beautiful Pacific Northwest scenery. I mailed care packages with local coffee and postcards of Mount Rainier. Everything came back marked "Return to Sender" in my mother's handwriting. They had blocked my number and removed me from all social media. Family friends I had known since childhood suddenly acted like strangers when I tried to contact them. The complete rejection was devastating, but it also lit a fire under me. If my family wouldn't support my dreams, I would prove them wrong through my own hard work and determination. I threw myself into my job with an intensity that surprised even my new colleagues. 18 months after moving to Seattle, I discovered, through a mutual acquaintance from high school, that Danny had been arrested for drunk driving and possession of marijuana. The golden child had fallen off his pedestal in spectacular fashion. Yet my parents never reached out during this family crisis, choosing to handle it without their disloyal son. The message was crystal clear: I was dead to them, even when they needed support the most. The pain of rejection became my fuel for success in ways I never could have imagined. While other junior developers were content to coast through their assignments, I stayed late every night absorbing knowledge like a sponge and volunteering for every challenging project that came through the door. My supervisor, Jake Morrison, a brilliant senior architect with 15 years of experience, took notice of my dedication. He became the mentor I desperately needed, teaching me advanced programming techniques and introducing me to the broader Seattle tech community. Jake had emigrated from Ireland in his 20s and understood what it meant to build a new life far from family. "Success is the best revenge, Clint," he told me one evening, as we worked late on a particularly complex database optimization project. "But more importantly, it's the best foundation for building the life you actually want." Maria Rodriguez, our project manager, became another crucial ally. A former engineer herself, she recognized my potential and began assigning me increasingly responsible roles. Under her guidance, I learned project management, client relations, and team leadership skills that would prove invaluable later. The first winter in Seattle nearly broke me. The constant drizzle and gray skies amplified my loneliness and depression. I found myself spending entire weekends in my small apartment coding obsessively to avoid confronting the emotional void left by my family's abandonment. Some nights I would stare at my phone for hours, composing text messages to my parents that I never sent. Maria noticed my struggles and recommended Dr. Patricia Reynolds, a therapist who specialized in family trauma and life transitions. Those weekly sessions became my lifeline, helping me process the complex emotions surrounding my family's rejection and my own feelings of guilt and worthlessness. Your worth isn't determined by other people's approval, even when those people are your parents, Dr. Reynolds explained during one particularly difficult session. You made a healthy choice to pursue your goals. Their inability to support that choice reflects their limitations, not yours. As my emotional health improved, my professional performance soared. I began developing a side project during evenings and weekends, an inventory management app for small businesses. Having worked in retail, I understood the frustrations of tracking stock, managing suppliers, and forecasting demand with outdated systems. The app, which I called StockSmart, started as a simple tool for the Chinese restaurant below my old apartment. The owner, Mrs. Chen, had mentioned her struggles with inventory waste and shortage issues. I designed a user-friendly interface that could track ingredients, predict usage patterns, and automatically generate supply orders. Word spread quickly through the local business community. The corner grocery store wanted a version for their produce section. The hardware store across from Tech World Electronics asked for a modification to handle seasonal inventory fluctuations. Within 6 months, I had 25 paying customers across the Pacific Northwest. Jake and Maria were impressed by my entrepreneurial initiative and encouraged me to think bigger. They introduced me to other developers who shared my vision of democratizing business technology for smaller companies. We formed an informal team meeting in coffee shops and co-working spaces to refine the product. During this period, I hired a private investigator named Robert Henley to discreetly monitor my family's welfare. I told myself it was just to ensure they were safe, but deep down I hoped to find some opening for reconciliation. The reports he provided painted a troubling picture. Danny had indeed dropped out of Notre Dame during his junior year, returning home, under circumstances that remained unclear. Dad's construction business was struggling due to the economic downturn and increased competition from larger companies. The family had taken out a second mortgage on their home and was falling behind on payments. Despite learning about their financial struggles, I resisted the urge to reach out. Dr. Reynolds helped me understand that my desire to rescue them was rooted in childhood patterns of seeking approval through caretaking. Instead, I focused on building my own stability and success. My persistence paid off when StockSmart reached its first major milestone, 100,000 downloads across the app stores. The user reviews were overwhelmingly positive, with small business owners praising the app's simplicity and effectiveness. Local Seattle media began covering our story, describing us as an example of homegrown innovation addressing real-world problems. More importantly, venture capital firms started taking notice. We received our first serious investment inquiry from a fund that specialized in business-to-business software companies. The prospect of scaling StockSmart into a national platform was both thrilling and terrifying. But success in business couldn't fill the emotional hole left by family rejection. I started dating Amanda Phillips, a marketing director at another startup, who understood the demands and uncertainties of building a company. Our relationship developed slowly, built on shared experiences of late nights, failed prototypes, and small victories celebrated over cheap takeout dinners. Amanda helped me see that I was building more than just a business. I was creating the foundation for the life I had always wanted: meaningful work, financial independence, and relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or expectation. The private investigator's reports became increasingly concerning. Danny had developed what appeared to be a gambling problem, frequently visiting the Riverboat Casino 2 hours away. He had been arrested twice more for public intoxication and once for disorderly conduct. My parents were covering his legal fees and fines, further straining their already precarious finances. The most shocking revelation came in Robert's 6th monthly report. Danny had stolen $8,000 from the construction business checking account money that was designated for payroll taxes. Dad had covered the shortage by taking a cash advance on his credit cards, but the incident had damaged his relationship with his employees and suppliers. I struggled with the knowledge that I could easily solve their financial problems while they remained completely unaware of my growing success. Dr. Reynolds helped me understand that rescuing them without addressing the underlying dysfunction would only enable Danny's destructive behavior and reinforce my parents' favoritism. Instead, I made a decision that felt both generous and protective. I would help them anonymously, focusing on genuine solutions rather than just throwing money at problems. If Danny truly had a gambling addiction, he needed professional treatment, not cash that would disappear at the nearest casino. The private investigators' reports had revealed the full scope of Danny's problems, and they were far worse than I had initially understood. His gambling addiction had escalated from occasional casino visits to daily online betting sports wagering and high-stakes poker games in private clubs around Indianapolis. Robert Henley provided documentation showing that Danny had accumulated debts totaling over $80,000 to various bookmakers and loan sharks. He had convinced my parents to co-sign for multiple credit cards and personal loans, all of which were now in default. The family home where I had grown up was facing foreclosure proceedings that would begin in 60 days. The emotional weight of this information was staggering. These were the same people who had cut me out of their lives completely. Yet I couldn't stand by and watch them lose everything to Danny's addiction. Dr. Reynolds helped me process the complex feelings of love, anger, and responsibility that threatened to overwhelm me. "You can't control their choices, Clint," she reminded me during our weekly session. "But you can choose how to respond in a way that aligns with your values while protecting your own well-being." I spent weeks researching addiction treatment options, reading medical journals, and consulting with specialists. The consensus was clear: Danny needed intensive residential treatment at a facility that specialized in gambling addiction. Simply paying off his debts would only enable him to create new ones. I found the perfect solution at Mountain Vista Recovery Center in Colorado Springs, a 90-day residential program with an excellent success rate for gambling addiction. The facility used a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy, group counseling, and financial rehabilitation to address both the psychological and practical aspects of the disease. The challenge was arranging Danny's admission without revealing my involvement. I created a fake identity as David Clifford, supposedly a wealthy businessman who had overcome his own gambling addiction and now funded treatment for others through a private foundation. The story was believable enough to satisfy the facility's admissions team and my family's questions. Working through an intermediary lawyer, I arranged for the facility to contact my parents directly with an offer. They would cover all treatment costs, transportation, and even provide a modest stipend for family therapy sessions. The only requirement was Danny's voluntary participation and commitment to completing the full program. My parents were initially suspicious of such generosity from a stranger, but their desperation overcame their skepticism. Danny, facing the prospect of legal action from his creditors, reluctantly agreed to enter treatment. The facility's transportation team picked him up from Cedar Falls on a Tuesday morning in March, beginning what I hoped would be his path to recovery. While Danny was in treatment, I continued monitoring the family's financial situation. The gambling debts remained, and the foreclosure proceedings moved forward despite his absence. I realized that saving their home would require a more direct intervention. Through the same intermediary lawyer, I arranged for an estate settlement to pay off the mortgage and outstanding debts. The story was that a distant relative had left money in a trust specifically for helping family members in crisis. The paperwork was complex enough to seem legitimate while protecting my identity. My parents were overwhelmed by this second stroke of good fortune. They began attending family therapy sessions at a local clinic, working to understand how Danny's addiction had affected the entire family system. For the first time in years, they started setting boundaries and making plans for a healthier future. Meanwhile, my own life was reaching new heights of success. StockSmart had evolved into a comprehensive business management platform called Streamline Logic, offering inventory tracking, customer relationship management, and financial reporting tools. Our user base had grown to over 50,000 businesses across North America. The venture capital funding had allowed us to hire a team of 12 employees and move into a proper office space in Seattle's South Lake Union district. I was learning to be a CEO, making decisions about product development, marketing strategy, and company culture. The responsibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. Amanda and I had moved in together, renting a small house in the Fremont neighborhood with a view of the Ship Canal. She had become my partner in every sense, offering support during the stressful periods and celebrating the victories with genuine enthusiasm. Her own startup was thriving, and we often spent evenings discussing the challenges and rewards of entrepreneurship. The private investigators' reports from Colorado were encouraging. Danny was participating actively in group therapy and individual counseling sessions. He had acknowledged the full extent of his gambling problem and was working with a financial counselor to understand the damage he had caused. His letters to my parents showed genuine remorse and commitment to change. But I also knew that residential treatment was only the beginning. Long-term recovery would require ongoing support, lifestyle changes, and probably relocation away from the triggers and connections that had enabled his gambling. I began researching sober living facilities and job training programs that could provide structure during his transition back to independent living. 6 months into Danny's treatment program, I received the call I had been both hoping for and dreading. Mountain Vista's family counselor informed me that Danny had completed the residential phase successfully and was ready to move into their extended care program. This involved transitional housing and part-time work while continuing with counseling and support groups. The progress reports were genuinely encouraging. Danny had lost 30 pounds, restored his sleep schedule, and developed healthy coping mechanisms for stress and anxiety. He was volunteering as a peer mentor for newer residents and had expressed interest in pursuing addiction counseling as a career. My parents were transformed by the experience as well. The family therapy sessions had helped them recognize their role in enabling Danny's addiction through denial and financial rescue. They had learned to set boundaries and were rebuilding their own relationship after years of crisis management. For a brief moment, I considered revealing my role in Danny's recovery. The success seemed to validate my decision to help anonymously, and part of me wanted recognition for my sacrifice and generosity. But Dr. Reynolds cautioned me against expecting gratitude or reconciliation as rewards for my assistance. "You did this because it was the right thing to do," she reminded me. "Don't contaminate that pure motivation by seeking external validation." Her warning proved prophetic. Just as I was feeling optimistic about Danny's progress and my family's healing, everything unraveled in the span of a single week. Danny left the extended care program without completing it, claiming he was ready to return home and rebuild his life independently. Within 2 weeks of his return to Cedar Falls, he had relapsed spectacularly. He stole $20,000 from the construction business account that Dad had just rebuilt with contracts from the post-foreclosure house flippers. This time, however, there would be no anonymous benefactor to cover the shortage. Danny had disappeared with the money, leaving behind only a note claiming he had figured out a system that would make them all rich. The acquisition offer arrived on a Thursday morning that started like any other. I was reviewing quarterly financial reports in my office when Jake burst through the door with an expression I had never seen before. His usually calm demeanor was replaced by barely contained excitement. "Clint, you need to see this immediately," he said, placing a thick envelope on my desk. "Microsoft wants to acquire Streamline Logic." The numbers inside the envelope were staggering. Microsoft was offering $12 million for our company, recognizing the potential of our small business platform to integrate with their cloud services ecosystem. My share after taxes and employee profit sharing would be approximately $4.2 million. The Seattle tech community was buzzing with news of the acquisition within hours. Local media outlets covered the story as an example of homegrown innovation succeeding on the national stage. The Seattle Times published a feature article with my photo describing my journey from small-town retail worker to successful tech entrepreneur. The article mentioned my Indiana roots and credited my understanding of small business challenges to my retail experience in Cedar Falls. Reading my name and hometown in print felt surreal after years of building my identity as a Seattle transplant. I wondered if anyone back home would see the coverage, but I pushed the thought away. My family had made their choice 3 years ago. That same week, disaster struck my family again. Danny's relapse had been even more devastating than I initially understood. Robert Henley's emergency report revealed that Danny had not only stolen from the construction business, but had also cleaned out my parents' savings account and taken their retirement fund. The pattern was becoming painfully clear. Danny would disappear for days at a time, gambling away stolen money in Indianapolis casinos and underground poker games. When he lost everything, he would return home with elaborate stories about investment opportunities or business ventures that required just a little more funding. My parents, exhausted by years of crisis and manipulation, had finally reached their breaking point. Susan had filed a missing person report when Danny failed to return home for 5 days. The police found him unconscious in a seedy motel room after what appeared to be an accidental overdose of prescription painkillers mixed with alcohol. The hospital stay and subsequent legal complications had drained the last of their resources. Frank's construction business was failing without operating capital, and they were facing bankruptcy proceedings that would destroy what little financial security they had left. Unknown to me, Martha Henderson, our former next-door neighbor, had seen the Seattle Times article online while researching local news for her church newsletter. Martha had known me since childhood and remembered my passion for computers and technology. She printed the article and brought it to my parents' house, thinking they would be proud of my success. The revelation that their failure son had become a millionaire tech entrepreneur must have been devastating for Frank and Susan. They spent 3 days processing the information according to Martha's later account. Frank initially refused to believe the article was accurate, insisting that successful business leaders didn't come from places like Cedar Falls. Susan was more pragmatic. She recognized my name and face in the photo, and the details about my retail background were too specific to be coincidental. More importantly, she saw an opportunity to solve their immediate financial crisis. The debate between my parents lasted for days. Frank's pride warred with their desperate circumstances. He had spent 3 years telling friends and neighbors that I was ungrateful and irresponsible for abandoning my family. Admitting that I had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams would require acknowledging his fundamental misjudgment. Susan argued that family loyalty worked both directions. If I had truly become wealthy, then I owed them support in their time of crisis. She convinced Frank that my success was partially built on the foundation they had provided during my childhood and education. The text message arrived on a Sunday evening while Amanda and I were preparing dinner in our kitchen. We had been discussing plans for our upcoming wedding and talking about potential honeymoon destinations. The simple notification sound interrupted our conversation and changed everything. Your brother Danny needs money for rehab. We're driving to Seattle. Be ready. No greeting. No explanation of 3 years of silence. No acknowledgement of the pain their rejection had caused, or curiosity about my well-being. Just an assumption that I would comply with their demands, because we shared DNA. Amanda saw my face go pale as I read the message. "What is it, Clint? You look like you've seen a ghost." I showed her the text, and she immediately understood the magnitude of what was happening. She had heard countless stories about my family's abandonment, and knew how deeply their rejection had affected me. Her first instinct was protective anger. "You don't owe them anything," she said firmly. "They made their choice when they cut you off. Don't let them manipulate you now that you're successful." My friend Jake had a similar reaction when I called him for advice. "Mate, these people treated you like garbage when you needed support. Now they want to use you like an ATM machine. Tell them to take a long walk off a short pier." But Dr. Reynolds, as always, helped me see the situation more clearly. "This could be an opportunity for closure, Clint. You don't have to give them money, but you could use this interaction to set boundaries and possibly heal some old wounds." I spent the next 2 days researching everything I could about Danny's latest situation. Through Robert Henley and my contacts at Mountain Vista Recovery Center, I learned the full scope of his current crisis. Danny had not only relapsed into gambling, but had also developed relationships with dangerous people in Indianapolis who were demanding repayment of substantial loans. More troubling was the discovery that Danny had been lying to everyone about his recovery progress. He had never completed the extended care program as claimed, and his apparent sobriety during family therapy sessions had been an elaborate performance. The facility's director warned me that Danny was now contacting various treatment centers trying to get reference letters that he could show to potential benefactors. The pieces fell into place. Danny knew about the anonymous help I had provided, either through investigation or lucky guessing. He was planning to use his parents' desperation and my supposed family obligations to fund his next gambling spree. The rehabilitation story was just another manipulation tactic. I made a decision that surprised even myself. I would let my parents come to Seattle, but the confrontation would happen on my terms. They were about to learn that their disappointing son had not only succeeded beyond their expectations, but had been secretly supporting them for years, while they remained oblivious to Danny's continued deception. The stage was set for a reckoning that would either destroy our relationship permanently or provide the foundation for something healthier. After 3 years of silence, my parents were about to discover what they had really lost when they chose their golden child over their honest son. Monday morning arrived with the typical Seattle drizzle that had become the soundtrack to my new life. I was conducting a team meeting about the Microsoft integration timeline when my assistant knocked on the conference room door with an apologetic expression. "Clint, there are 2 people in the lobby asking to see you. They say they're your parents, but they don't have an appointment." The room fell silent as 15 employees turned to look at me. Very few people at Streamline Logic knew about my family situation, and I'd certainly never mentioned estranged relatives to anyone on my team. I excused myself from the meeting and walked to our modern reception area with my heart pounding. Frank and Susan looked completely out of place among the sleek furniture, contemporary art, and wall-mounted monitors displaying our company metrics. They were dressed in their Sunday best, Dad wearing a wrinkled suit that had seen better days, and Mom in a floral dress that emphasized how much weight she had lost during recent months of stress. Their expressions shifted from uncertainty to shock as they took in the professional environment. Our office occupied 2 floors of a glass tower in South Lake Union, with panoramic views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains. The reception area featured our company awards, framed articles about our growth, and a digital display showing real-time usage statistics from our 50,000 business customers. "Hello, Frank." "Hello, Susan." I said, extending my hand for what became the most awkward handshakes of my life. No hugs, no warmth, just the formal greeting you might give to strangers at a business conference. Amanda emerged from her office, having heard the commotion. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, every inch the successful marketing executive she had become. My parents' eyes widened as they realized this poised, confident woman was connected to their failure son. "Mom, Dad, this is Amanda Phillips, my fiancée and business partner." The word fiancé hit them like a physical blow. They had missed my engagement, would likely miss my wedding, and were meeting my future wife for the first time in an office lobby instead of around a family dinner table. Frank recovered first, his construction worker instincts kicking in as he assessed the building and furnishings. "Nice little office you got here, son," he said with forced casualness that fooled no one. "Thank you," I replied, matching his formal tone. "Would you like a tour?" I led them through our development area where programmers worked on multiple monitors surrounded by whiteboards covered in technical diagrams. The project management section displayed timeline charts for major corporate clients. The quality assurance team was testing our latest mobile app updates on dozens of different devices. My parents followed in stunned silence, occasionally exchanging glances that spoke volumes about their misunderstanding of my career choice. This was not the computer nonsense they had dismissed 3 years earlier. This was a legitimate, thriving business that employed dozens of people and served thousands of customers. "How many people work here?" Susan finally asked as we passed the customer service department. 28 full-time employees plus 6 contractors. I answered matter-of-factly. "We're expanding to 40 people by year-end to handle the Microsoft partnership." The word Microsoft caused another visible reaction. Even in small-town Indiana, they knew that name represented serious business. Their son wasn't playing with computers in his basement. He was partnering with one of the world's largest technology companies. The drive to my house provided another series of reality checks. My car was a modest but well-maintained Subaru Outback, practical for Seattle weather, but clearly newer and better equipped than anything in their driveway. When I pulled into the garage of my 3-bedroom house in Fremont, Frank actually whistled under his breath. "This is where you live?" Mom asked as we walked through the front door into my open-concept living space. The house featured hardwood floors, granite countertops, and large windows showcasing views of the Fremont Bridge and Ship Canal. My home office contained multiple computer monitors, professional lighting for video conferences, and walls lined with business books and technical manuals. But what really caught their attention were the wedding photos displayed throughout the living room. Amanda and I had eloped to Hawaii 6 months earlier, unable to wait for family reconciliation that might never come. The professional photographs showed us on a beautiful beach at sunset, looking genuinely happy and deeply in love. "You got married?" Susan's voice cracked with an emotion I couldn't identify. Hurt regret, disappointment at missing such an important milestone. "Yes, we did, last October in Maui. It was a small ceremony, just the two of us, and a photographer." I didn't mention that we had considered inviting them despite everything, or that Amanda had encouraged me to try reaching out one more time. I served coffee in my dining room, treating them with the same polite courtesy I would show to any guests. The emotional distance felt protective, but also profoundly sad. These people had raised me, taught me to ride a bicycle, attended my high school graduation. Now we were sitting together like polite strangers discussing the weather. Susan launched into the prepared speech she had obviously rehearsed during the drive from Indiana. "Clint, we know there have been some difficulties between us, but family is family. Danny is in serious trouble, and we need your help to get him the treatment he deserves." Her use of the word difficulties to describe 3 years of complete rejection would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. Frank nodded along, clearly uncomfortable, but committed to their plan. He's found an excellent rehabilitation program in California that specializes in his particular problems. Frank added producing a glossy brochure that looked suspiciously professional. It costs $50,000, but it's supposed to have amazing results. I examined the brochure carefully, noting the stock photography and generic testimonials that screamed scam. The facility's address was a post office box, and the phone number went to an answering service. Danny had clearly put considerable effort into creating this fake treatment center to support his latest con game. "Before we discuss any financial assistance," I said calmly, "I think you should see something." I retrieved the thick folder I had prepared from my home office. Inside were copies of bank records, treatment center reports, and private investigator documentation spanning the previous 2 years. I spread the documents across the dining room table like evidence in a courtroom. "This is the real Mountain Vista Recovery Center in Colorado Springs, where Danny spent 6 months in treatment that I paid for anonymously, $90,000 in total costs." I showed them the bank transfer records with my signature clearly visible. Their faces went through a sequence of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and slowly dawning recognition of what they were seeing. "This is documentation of mortgage payments I made to prevent foreclosure on your house. $60,000 over 8 months. More bank records, more proof of my secret assistance. These are records from Danny's second treatment attempt, also funded by me through an intermediary. $80,000 that went down the drain when he left early to resume gambling. The evidence kept mounting. Payment records for their utilities, medical bills, car repairs, and dozens of other expenses I had covered without their knowledge. The total exceeded $270,000 in assistance provided, while they maintained complete silence about my existence." Susan broke down crying, covering her face with hands that shook uncontrollably. Frank stared at the documents with an expression of stunned disbelief, occasionally picking up a bank record to examine my signature or account information. "You've been helping us this whole time," Mom finally managed to ask through her tears. "Yes, I have, because despite everything that happened between us, I still love you. I couldn't stand by and watch you lose everything, even though you had made it clear I wasn't welcome in your lives." Frank found his voice, though it was rough with emotion. But why didn't you tell us? Why all the secrecy? Because you had chosen Danny over me. Because you thought I was selfish and irresponsible for pursuing my dreams. Because you returned my letters and blocked my phone calls. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected gratitude or reconciliation. Amanda arrived home from her office as we were processing this information. She had deliberately stayed away to give us privacy, but her presence reminded my parents that I had built a complete life without them. I introduced her properly, and she graciously offered to prepare dinner while we continued our conversation. The truth about Danny's current situation spilled out over the next hour. Frank admitted that the golden child had stolen their retirement fund, maxed out credit cards in their names, and disappeared for weeks at a time. The fake rehabilitation brochure was just his latest attempt to extract money from potential victims. "We were wrong," Susan said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We were so wrong about everything. About you, about Danny, about what really mattered." Frank nodded reluctantly, his contractor's hands fidgeting with the coffee cup. "I thought you were abandoning your family. I didn't understand that you were trying to build something better." The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. The caller ID showed Indianapolis Police Department, and I had a sinking feeling about what they were calling to tell us. I answered on speaker so my parents could hear whatever news was coming. "Mr. Clint Henderson, this is Detective Morrison with the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police. We have your brother Danny in custody for armed robbery. He tried to rob the Tech World electronics store in Cedar Falls, claiming his brother owed him millions of dollars. During the arrest, he made several threats against you and your family. We need to discuss this situation immediately." The silence in my dining room was deafening as Detective Morrison's words sank in. Danny had attempted to rob the very store where I had worked before moving to Seattle using a fake gun and claiming I had stolen money from the family business. The irony was almost too much to comprehend. "Detective, my parents are here with me right now," I said, looking at Frank and Susan's shocked expressions. "Can you provide more details about what happened?" "Your brother entered Tech World Electronics at approximately 3:30 this afternoon, brandishing what appeared to be a handgun. He demanded money from the register and kept shouting about his rich brother, who had abandoned the family and owed him millions. The weapon turned out to be a realistic toy, but that doesn't change the felony charges he's facing." Frank had gone completely pale, gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Susan was crying again, but these were different tears. The last illusions about their golden child were crashing down around her. During processing, he became increasingly agitated and made specific threats against you and your property. He claimed he knows where you live and has plans to get what's owed to him. Given the cross-state nature of these threats, we're coordinating with Seattle police to ensure your safety. I thanked the detective and arranged to speak with them again the following morning. After hanging up, I turned to face my parents, who looked like they had aged 10 years in the past 5 minutes. "This is who Danny really is," I said gently. "This is what your support and protection enabled him to become." Over the next 2 hours, the complete truth emerged piece by piece. Frank admitted that Danny's problems had started much earlier than they had acknowledged. There had been incidents of theft and lying throughout high school that they had covered up to protect his football scholarship. The college dropout had been the result of academic probation and suspicion of point shaving in games. "We thought we were helping him," Susan explained through fresh tears. "We thought if we just gave him enough support and opportunities, he would figure things out." I pulled out my laptop and showed them the private investigator reports I had been receiving for 2 years. The documentation painted a picture of escalating criminal behavior, substance abuse, and manipulation that my parents had either ignored or enabled through denial. "Danny has been telling people around Cedar Falls that I stole money from you to start my business," I explained, showing them printed social media posts and witness statements. "He's been building a narrative that justifies him taking whatever he can from me. The revelation that Danny had been systematically destroying my reputation in our hometown while I was secretly supporting the family was devastating for my parents. They began to understand the full scope of their mistakes and the price their favoritism had extracted. "I have something else to show you," I said, retrieving Amanda's phone from the kitchen counter. "Amanda has been recording our conversation tonight with my knowledge and consent." Their eyes widened in alarm until I explained the reason. "Danny has been calling our house for the past 2 weeks, leaving threatening voicemails and claiming he's going to expose my theft to the media and police. We needed evidence to protect ourselves from his false accusations." I played several of the voicemails, each one more unhinged than the last. Danny's voice was slurred and angry as he ranted about his successful brother who had stolen the family's money and abandoned them in their time of need. He detailed plans to contact local news stations and law enforcement agencies with his fabricated story. The recordings proved that his claims are baseless and malicious. Amanda explained her legal background, evident in her careful phrasing. "If he follows through on his threats, we have documentation showing this is part of a pattern of harassment and extortion." Frank finally found his voice, though it was heavy with shame and regret. "Clint, I owe you an apology that's 3 years overdue. We failed you as parents, and we failed Danny by enabling his problems. I don't know how to begin making this right." Susan nodded through her tears. "We were so focused on protecting Danny that we drove away our good son, the son who was actually making something of himself, who was honest and hardworking, and everything we should have been proud of." The conversation that followed was the most honest discussion we had ever had as a family. My parents acknowledged their pattern of favoritism, their fear of change, and their fundamental misunderstanding of what loyalty really meant. They admitted that cutting me off had been cruel and destructive, motivated more by wounded pride than genuine conviction. "I need you both to understand something," I said carefully. "I'm willing to rebuild our relationship, but it has to be based on honesty and mutual respect. I won't tolerate any more manipulation, whether it comes from Danny or anyone else." I outlined my conditions for moving forward. They would need to commit to family therapy both together and individually. They would have to stop enabling Danny's destructive behavior, even if that meant letting him face legal consequences for his actions. Most importantly, they would need to accept Amanda as my wife and respect the life I had built in Seattle. "I'm not the same person who left Cedar Falls 3 years ago," I continued. "I'm not going to apologize for my success or feel guilty about pursuing my dreams. If we're going to have a relationship, it has to be between equals, not between disappointed parents, and a son who's constantly trying to earn approval." Frank extended his hand across the table, and this time the handshake felt genuine. "I'd like to try, son. I'd like to try to be the father you deserved all along." Susan reached across to squeeze my other hand. "Can you forgive us? Can you find it in your heart to give us another chance?" The question hung in the air as Amanda returned from the kitchen with fresh coffee and homemade cookies. Her presence reminded me that forgiveness didn't require forgetting, and that rebuilding trust would be a gradual process requiring consistent effort from everyone involved. "I can try," I said finally, "but this is going to take time, and there are going to be rules. Danny's behavior ends here tonight. No more excuses, no more bailouts, no more second chances until he demonstrates genuine change through actions, not words." We spent another hour discussing practical matters. My parents would return to Indiana in the morning and immediately begin counseling with a therapist I would help them find. They would cooperate fully with law enforcement regarding Danny's case, providing whatever information was needed to ensure appropriate consequences. Most importantly, they would start rebuilding their own lives based on reality, rather than the fantasies they had maintained about their golden child. Frank would restart his construction business using legitimate financing rather than borrowed money. Susan would return to the teaching career she had abandoned to manage family crises. As my parents prepared to leave for their hotel, Susan turned back at the front door. "Clint, I know we don't deserve this, but would you consider coming home for Christmas? Not to the old house, but to be with family again?" I looked at Amanda, who nodded encouragingly. "Let's see how the next few months go," I replied. "But yes, I'd like that to be possible someday." After they left, Amanda and I sat together on our couch, processing the emotional whirlwind of the evening. The confrontation had been both exhausting and cathartic, opening wounds that needed to heal while also providing hope for genuine reconciliation. "Are you okay?" she asked, curling up against my shoulder. "I think so. For the first time in 3 years, I feel like there's a chance we could actually be a real family again. Not the dysfunctional mess we were before, but something healthier and more honest." The road ahead would be challenging, requiring patience, consistency, and the courage to maintain boundaries even when emotions ran high. But for the first time since leaving Cedar Falls, I felt optimistic about the possibility of having both my chosen family in Seattle and my biological family in Indiana coexist in my life. The reckoning was complete. Now the real work of healing could begin. 6 months after that life-changing confrontation in my dining room, I received a call that would have seemed impossible during the darkest days of our family estrangement. It was Susan, and her voice carried a lightness I hadn't heard since childhood. "Clint, I have wonderful news. Your father just landed a contract to build 3 houses for the new development outside town. It's the biggest project he's had in 5 years, and he did it completely on his own merit." The pride in her voice was genuine and well-deserved. Frank had rebuilt his construction business from the ground up using a small business loan and his reputation for honest work rather than borrowed money or family manipulation. He had even hired 2 employees, creating jobs in their struggling community. The legal situation with Danny had resolved more favorably than anyone expected. His public defender, reviewing the case file and character statements, advised him to accept a plea deal rather than risk a lengthy prison sentence. The judge sentenced him to 2 years of supervised probation with mandatory participation in a court-ordered rehabilitation program. More importantly, Danny was finally taking responsibility for his actions. He had written me a heartfelt letter of apology after completing his first 90 days of sobriety, acknowledging the damage his lies and theft had caused to everyone around him. The letter was specific, honest, and free of the manipulation tactics that had characterized his previous communications. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he had written in careful handwriting. "I destroyed our family relationship, stole money you worked hard to provide, and tried to blame you for my own failures. I'm not asking for money or help or even contact. I just want you to know that I understand what I did was wrong, and I'm committed to making amends through my actions, not my words." The transformation in my parents was equally remarkable. They had thrown themselves into both individual and couples therapy with Dr. Margaret Foster, a specialist in family systems, who helped them understand how their patterns of enabling and favoritism had damaged all of us. The weekly video calls we now shared were honest, supportive, and focused on building genuine connections rather than managing crises. Susan had returned to substitute teaching and was considering pursuing her master's degree in education. Frank had joined a small business support group and was learning modern marketing techniques to grow his construction company. Most importantly, they were learning to see Danny's recovery as his responsibility, not theirs. My own life had reached heights I never could have imagined during those lonely early days in Seattle. The Microsoft acquisition had provided financial security, but it had also opened doors to new challenges and opportunities that were far more meaningful than money. I used a significant portion of the acquisition proceeds to launch the Rural Tech Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to bringing technology opportunities to small communities across the Midwest. The program offered coding boot camps, digital marketing training, and startup incubation services designed specifically for rural entrepreneurs. Cedar Falls became our pilot location, with programs hosted in the community college and the renovated downtown library. Seeing young people in my hometown gain skills and confidence in technology was deeply satisfying, providing hope that future generations wouldn't have to choose between family and career advancement. Amanda and I had renewed our vows in a beautiful ceremony at Pike Place Market with my parents in attendance for the first time. Frank walked Amanda down the aisle when her father was unable to travel, and Susan helped coordinate the small reception. The photos from that day showed genuine smiles and authentic connections that would have been impossible a year earlier. Our professional partnership had also evolved beyond my wildest expectations. Amanda's marketing expertise had been instrumental in launching the Rural Tech Initiative, and she had accepted a position as the nonprofit's executive director. Together, we were building something that combined business success with social impact. Danny's journey toward redemption had been slower, but equally meaningful. After completing the court-mandated program he had applied for and been accepted into a peer counseling certification program, he was now working at the same Indianapolis Rehabilitation Center, where he had once been a patient helping other gambling addicts understand the destructive patterns he knew so well. His transformation seemed genuine and sustainable. The weekly family therapy sessions included him via video call, and his contributions were thoughtful and honest. He had begun paying back the money he had stolen, sending small amounts from his modest salary as a gesture of commitment rather than a realistic debt payment plan. "I can't undo what I did," he told us during one particularly moving session, "but I can use my experience to help other people avoid the same mistakes. Every person I help in recovery is a step toward making amends for the damage I caused." The geographic distance between Seattle and Indiana remained a reality, but it no longer felt like an insurmountable barrier. We visited each other regularly, with my parents making trips to the Pacific Northwest and Amanda and me spending holidays in the Midwest. The Rural Tech Initiative provided a natural bridge between our two worlds. More importantly, the relationships were built on choice rather than obligation. My parents' love and support was no longer conditional on my conformity to their expectations. They celebrated my success because they were proud of who I had become, not because they needed something from me. The financial assistance I continued to provide was transparent and purposeful rather than secretive and enabling. When Frank needed equipment for his expanding business, we discussed the loan terms openly and created a formal repayment schedule. When Susan wanted to pursue her master's degree, I offered to cover tuition as an investment in her dreams rather than a family obligation. On a sunny Saturday morning in October, exactly 1 year after the confrontation that changed everything, I received a text message that brought tears to my eyes. It was from Danny, and it included a photo of him speaking at a Gamblers Anonymous meeting in Indianapolis. "1 year sober today. I know I have a long way to go, but I wanted you to know that your example of rebuilding your life gave me hope that I could do the same. Thank you for not giving up on our family even when we gave up on ourselves." Amanda found me crying in our kitchen as I read the message. "Good tears or bad tears?" she asked, wrapping her arms around me from behind. "The best tears," I replied, showing her the photo and message. It's just incredible how much can change when people are finally honest with themselves and each other. That evening, we hosted a small dinner party with our closest friends and colleagues from Streamline Logic. Jake Morrison had become like an older brother to me, and Maria Rodriguez was the godmother we had chosen for our future children. The conversation ranged from business strategies to travel plans to the ongoing challenges of maintaining long-distance family relationships. As I looked around the table at the life Amanda and I had built together, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us here. The pain of family rejection had been devastating, but it had also forced me to develop resilience, independence, and clarity about my own values. The success we had achieved was meaningful, not because of the money or recognition, but because it was built on integrity, hard work, and genuine service to others. The Rural Tech Initiative was helping young people in places like Cedar Falls pursue their dreams without having to abandon their roots. My parents were rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. Danny was finding purpose in helping others overcome the addiction that had nearly destroyed him. Most importantly, I had learned that family isn't just about blood relationships or geographic proximity. Family is about people who support your growth, celebrate your successes, and stand by you during difficult times. Amanda, Jake, Maria, Dr. Reynolds, and many others had become my chosen family during the years when my biological family was unavailable. The reconciliation with my parents and brother had been a bonus, not a requirement for my happiness. By building a life based on my own values and surrounding myself with people who shared those values, I had created the foundation for both personal fulfillment and the possibility of healthy relationships with my original family. As our dinner party wound down and our friends prepared to leave, Amanda raised her glass for a final toast. To families that choose to grow together rather than apart, and to the courage it takes to build the life you actually want rather than the life others expect from you. The words captured everything I had learned about love, loyalty, and the difference between enabling dysfunction and supporting genuine growth. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to participate in someone's destruction. Real family supports each other's growth, not each other's weaknesses. Success earned through integrity creates opportunities to heal old wounds and build bridges previously thought burned forever. The courage to set boundaries often saves relationships that seemed beyond repair, allowing them to be rebuilt on healthier foundations. My journey from rejection to reconciliation had taught me that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, that love doesn't mean enabling, and that family relationships must be based on mutual respect to survive and thrive. The small-town boy who left Cedar Falls in a beaten Honda Civic had become a man who understood that true success means having the freedom to choose your relationships based on health rather than history. The phone buzzed one final time as Amanda and I cleaned up the dinner dishes. It was a group text from my parents and Danny sharing photos from Frank's latest construction project. They were building a community center in Cedar Falls that would house our Rural Tech Initiative programs, creating a permanent symbol of how far we had all traveled from the dysfunction of our past toward the possibility of our future. I smiled as I typed my response, "Beautiful work, Dad. I'm proud of all of you and grateful we found our way back to each other." The response came quickly from Susan. "We're proud of you too, son. Thank you for not giving up on us even when we gave up on ourselves." As I turned off the lights in our house that night, I reflected on the profound truth that had emerged from our family's journey. Love isn't about accepting destructive behavior or sacrificing your own growth for others' comfort. Love is about supporting each other's highest potential while maintaining the boundaries necessary for everyone's well-being. The greatest gift I had given my family wasn't money or forgiveness. It was the example of what's possible when someone commits to building a life based on integrity, purpose, and authentic relationships. By refusing to enable their dysfunction and insisting on honesty and accountability, I had helped create the conditions for genuine healing and growth. The story of our reconciliation would continue to evolve, requiring ongoing commitment from everyone involved. But for the first time in years, I was confident that we were all moving in the same direction toward health, honesty, and the kind of love that actually helps people become their best selves, rather than remaining trapped in their worst patterns. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between enabling a loved one's destructive behavior and setting boundaries that might save your relationship in the long run? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and building authentic success. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing that it's possible to rebuild damaged relationships on healthier foundations. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's destruction while building the life you actually want to live.